Hey everybody, we're back in the Fat Coffee office today and we're going to talk about grinding today. We threw some questions out, or a question box out on Instagram wanted to get some questions from you about what you have about grinding, because we think it's something that we get asked about a lot on our social media, particularly for the home market. So we thought we'd just sort of bundle up all your questions and put it into a nice little how-to or do's and don'ts or the importance in grinding guide. And answer some of the questions that we got. The way we sort of saw it was we got sort of two sections of questions about grinding. A lot were to do with how to actually dial in for your particular brew device. And the others were sort of more about generic questions about grinding. So we thought we were going to split that into two parts. So today is just going to be about what's the importance of grinding, do's, don'ts, what to look for, and why we grind coffee. And then we're going to do a separate video, which will be based on more like how do we actually dial in and how do we actually sort of like set recipes and develop brew ratios, etc. Okay, so today, the very beginning is why do we grind coffee? So as you can see, when you get your bag of coffee, you're going to have whole beans. And in order to extract flavor out of coffee, we actually need to grind it. Most of you have seen coffee grinders in cafes, or you understand that coffee needs to be ground, but a lot of people don't understand just how important grinding coffee is. So grinding coffee is by far the most fundamental part of the whole brewing process, and it's often overlooked. I hear a lot from our customers that people have gone out and bought a $3,000 home espresso machine, which is fabulous, and then they're grinding coffee off all sorts of, horrible devices. My advice would be to switch that around, put all your importance on grinding coffee, and buy a $5 plunger if need be. I can't stress just how important the grinding part is of the whole brewing process. And if you get the grinding part right, you're gonna get a much better cup of coffee than if you sort of like cheap out on the grinder or hack the grinding part and try and put your coffee through a really expensive coffee machine. So they're the things we're going to try and talk about today, like whys and why it's so important, and just like sort of some general things about the importance.
So Sash, one of the questions we got asked, and we actually get asked this quite often, is that can you grind your coffee on a NutriBullet? So, thoughts?
Which is why I'm going to grind some coffee. So we actually bought a NutriBullet in from home, and this is going to be one of the things we talk about first. So I was surprised to know, in my sort of more coffee purist mind, that people would even consider grinding coffee on something like a NutriBullet. However, we then learned a little more that from a little bit of market research, that one of the most popular grinders bought from your sort of Harvey Norman or Good Guys sort of stores are those $30 multi-purpose grinders that advertise themselves as coffee grinder, spice and herb grinder. You would have seen them. They just have their little like UFO spaceship kind of dome top that you just push down, and that you can grind like nuts, herbs and spices in. They also advertise as being a coffee grinder. They are not, and they are terrible for coffee, as is a NutriBullet, as is a blender, or anything else that functions off a blade system. So as you can see here, this is a blade system. It chops and does not grind. So one of the most important parts of grinding coffee is making sure we grind our coffee evenly. So it's really important that we get an even particle size. If we do not have an even particle size when we grind coffee, we will not get an even extraction. So we'll end up with a really uneven extraction, which makes it impossible to actually extract the optimal flavor out of coffee. These blade systems hack at the coffee. If you've ever seen ice in a blender, when you put ice in a blender and hit go, it all just kind of hacks it around. You end up with big chunks, little chunks, and it chops it really, really unevenly. So I'm just going to show you right here what I mean. So I'm just going to put this coffee into the NutriBullet. We're going to have a look at what happens here. So as you can see there, you'll see that some coffee beans are still almost whole. So we've just cut them in half, And then there's other parts, if we just kind of lay it out here. So here we go, we've got a whole coffee bean still there, so it didn't get ground or chopped at all. And then we have a whole range of different sizes. So we have shells, parts of the coffee that's still not ground at all, right down to more finer parts, some coarser, some finer. So what you can see here is that what a blade system does is it just chops. And what you end up getting is all sizes. So even if I left that on for longer, I would end up with some really, really fine particle sizes, but I'd still end up with some half shells and whatnot because it just cannot grind the coffee or chop the coffee evenly. Coffee grinders are designed to not chop, but grind the coffee, almost like crush the coffee in an even form. So when it goes through the crushing device or the grinding device, that it actually grinds all the particle sizes the same size. And that is the most important, that all our particle sizes end up the same size. So no to the NutriBullet, no to the multi-purpose grinders, no to the blender.
Awesome. So what's the next? So if we've got our grind actually properly grinding first, then what's the next important step, I guess, in grinding?
Cool. So the next thing, if I were to start this session, I would say the most important thing with grinding is that we're grinding freshly. So grinding, a term that we coin, like grinding on demand. So the most important thing with coffee, you're like, how do I get the best coffee? I'd say, well, grind your coffee freshly, grind on demand. So we as a company used to be more purist, and I used to say that we wouldn't offer ground coffee to our customers because I didn't believe that we should pre-ground coffee because I wanted all our customers to be grinding coffee on demand, as in fresh to order. So if you need 20 grams of coffee to go in your plunger to make your morning cup of coffee, you would only grind your 20 grams of coffee, etc. But then when we learned that when we were sending out all our whole beans, customers who wanted to buy quality coffee were buying our coffee but didn't have grinders, and so they were putting it in things like this, the NutriBullet, the multi-purpose grinders, mortar and pestle, all sorts of things. That's where we decided to change our policy as a company and decide that rather than our customers putting it into a hacking device and absolutely destroying the coffee, it's better for us to actually offer a grinding service where we can grind your coffee freshly, as fresh as possible, and grinding it the right way. So it's the most important to, if you have a grinder, to grind on demand and to grind it freshly, if that's possible. If you don't have a grinder, then rather than grind on demand, forget that as the most important step. The most important step is to make sure your coffee is ground properly, and that is making sure that the coffee particle sizes are ground appropriately for your brew device, and obviously the same particle size. So most specialty coffee roasters like us, and I'm sure many others, will actually grind your coffee fresh to order. So for us, if when your order comes in, we'll roast the coffee, and but literally before it's put in the box to send out that same day, we will grind your coffee however it needs to be ground for, depending on the brew device you have. Buying coffee from a supermarket, an alternative which is already pre-ground, chances are that coffee's been ground for months, if not years, which is obviously your worst case scenario. So you don't want coffee to be ground for long periods of time before you're purchasing it. So it's always best, if you don't have a grinder, to be buying from a specialty roaster who you know is going to be grinding it to order.
That's actually a really good segue, because we did have a question about supermarket coffee particularly, and if when it is ground, do you know if it's ground to a particular brew device, or is it a generic, or I guess how does it work? Because I don't think it's written on the packet at all.
Yeah, exactly. So there's two things. So obviously, like, the freshness is a problem from buying from the supermarkets, because you have no idea when that coffee was ground. Chances are it's been ground for a very long period of time, which means that all of the aroma from the coffee is probably going to be gone, meaning you're going to end up with no flavor, or a really lack of flavor in the cup. That's the first problem with pre-ground coffee that's been ground for a long period of time. The second problem is with buying coffee from the supermarket is they only generally offer coffee for like a fine or a coarse grind. So two just really generic grinds. Some are just like a multi-purpose grind, maybe just a single grind. Now what I can tell you about grinding coffee for brew devices, every brew device takes a different grind. So for instance, a plunger takes a really coarse grind, whereas an espresso machine takes a really fine grind. And then filter devices, automatic filter devices, and manual filter devices take like a more medium to coarse grind, which sort of sits in the middle. So even if the supermarket were grinding it really freshly, which they're not, but if they were, the problem would still lie in that you are not getting the coffee ground for your particular brew device, which is really problematic with brewing as well.
Cool. So that's actually perfect, because one of the other main questions we're getting is, how do I know how to grind to my brew device?
Yeah. So the next thing that you probably want to know is that coffee, when we're grinding coffee, we can grind coffee to lots of different particle sizes. So you've probably heard like fine, medium, and coarse grind. So basically all brew devices take a different particle size. There's too many to kind of talk about in detail, but to give you sort of two ends of the spectrum, as I just spoke about before, you've got plunger that takes a really coarse grind, and then you've got an espresso machine that takes a really fine grind. So it's not a one size fits all brew device. So when you order with us, you get a nice little drop down tab that has all the little brew devices listed, and when you sort of say, hey, I'm using a stovetop or a plunger or an AeroPress, we'll actually grind for your specific device. You can't then take that grind and put it through another brew device and expect the same outcome. Just know that like all brew devices require specific brew particle sizes based on the technology that the brew actually uses, that the brew device uses. So I'm just going to show you a couple little options here. So this is a hand grinder, which is awesome. So if you don't want to like go right out and buy a really expensive, like, you know, automatic grinder or home grinder, you can just get really good little hand grinders. They come in like, there's such a big range of hand grinders where you can get sort of really cheap ones, or you can get sort of more expensive hand grinders. But hand grinders are awesome. So you can have them traveling, you can have them on your desk at work. They're so easy, and then you can just get a little bit of coffee if you want to and just sort of grind it up as you need it. And if you want to sort of go out and buy a home grinder, there's a huge range of price range even that of grinders, which are fantastic now for, you know, for doing and serving the purpose that you need to do, for espresso machines, plungers, all sorts of things. So you do have a lot of options with grinders. You obviously have to spend a little bit more money than your $30 that you might have bought on multi-purpose grinders, but like I said, it's much better to invest in actually buying something that you can grind your coffee on if you want it to be ground freshly, than it is to go and actually spend a few $100s or something on buying a brew device and then trying to hack at your grind. So I'm just going to show you what a super fine grind looks like. So this is like, just going to move this little cuppity cup. So this is a finer grind, and this is something that might be used for an espresso machine. And as you can see, the way that it really telltales that you can see that it's fine. You can see how there's even some clumping together here. So when the coffee kind of clumps, imagine like icing sugar or something of a really sort of fine texture. Because the particle sizes are so fine, it creates a bit of clumping. And if you actually run it through your fingers, it actually feels quite soft. Like it has a really sort of fluffy, soft texture. But that's something that you might see used for an espresso machine or something that requires a finer particle size. Here we have a medium to coarse grind. So this is something that might be used for a filter device, like a V60, Mocha Master, or something in that sort of manual or automatic brewing. It kind of feels like, you can see just if we get really close here, so see how the particles are a lot more obvious. So you can see a little bit more shell and kind of a little bit more like the size of them actually looks just physically larger. But when you feel it and when you rub it through your fingers, it kind of feels like sugar, like a sort of, and really got to go like that and rub it through, but it really feels like a sort of like a coarse sugar. If I put out this last one that I've got, you can see again how the particle sizes look bigger again. You can see a little bit more shell and just chunkier bits. It looks fairly close visually. It might like seem quite close visually to this one, but if you actually do the sort of finger test and sort of rub it through like this, It
You can even hear the difference.
Yeah, you can actually hear the difference, but it actually feels like dirt, like almost like coarse dirt. Like it has a really, really grainy feeling, much more than this other one. This is something that we'd use for, say, a plunger that takes a much coarser grind. But the key is, as opposed to if we come back and actually have a look at our NutriBullet grind, the key is how consistent it is. So you can see just how consistent that fine grind is, and then sort of how consistent this coarse grind is, and medium grind is, and then how consistent this coarse grind is. So it doesn't look like this, which we're getting the result from the NutriBullet, which is really, really inconsistent.
Great. I think we answered all the questions, Saj.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any more questions on the topic of grinding, send them through to our Instagram story and we'll try and answer them as soon as possible. But basically, if you can take some tips away from today, the most important things are: do not use anything to grind your coffee that functions on a blade system. The next best option is to invest in a grinder for home over a really expensive brewing device first, and grind freshly if possible. If that's not possible and you want your coffee pre-ground, don't blend it like this. Don't buy it from the supermarket where it's going to be ground for ages. Buy from a specialty coffee roaster, which means at least you can get it tailored to your brew device, and you'll also get it ground as fresh as possible.
Bye.
Bye.